To transform the God debate from a false dichotomy into an honest discourse, we must clarify our assumptions regarding the very concepts under scrutiny. The questions posed in this debate have often been framed from a disadvantaged perspective, a situation that can be partly attributed to religion from its inception. Just as governmental institutions have frequently been seen as impeding freedom, religion has also played its role in ensuring that individuals can only approach God through intermediary institutions, such as priests and their respective man-made dogmas. Although Hegel's understanding of Christianity evolved over time, he remained affiliated with Lutheranism throughout his life. One of the primary distinctions between these two religious traditions is that Catholicism emphasizes the Church as the intermediary between the individual and God, with the Pope positioned at the apex of the hierarchy, while Lutheranism asserts that the relationship between the individual and God does not necessitate such mediation. Just as government institutions had to curtail individual freedom to establish a semblance of societal cohesion throughout history, often resorting to coercion, this was necessitated not only by the gradual evolution of human consciousness, but also by the need to address repeated catastrophic near-extinction events. Religion, too, played a role in this process. Like all governing bodies, both religious and secular, the Church and state alike demanded unwavering obedience from individuals to navigate through challenging circumstances. It would not have been in the interest of either institution as well as the people to acknowledge that the connection between God and the individual does not necessitate an intermediary. Such an admission would have undermined the power of ruling institutions, as they relied on the premise of intermediary authority. Consequently, they had to stifle the growth of consciousness to prevent it from reaching its fullest potential out of necessity. However, I believe we have now surpassed the need for such crude institutions. We require societal structures that align with the true state of our consciousness. Despite the hindrance to individual growth imposed by these institutions, we have nonetheless reached a level of maturity to some extent. The evidence of this can be seen in the current discourse we are engaged in, a discourse characterized by negation, a rejection of our conventional notions of civility and morality, as exemplified by atheists. While this discourse may be somewhat misleading, it nonetheless signifies progress. We are advancing in the same manner as we always have, as observed by Hegel, with spirit evolving through individuals via the process of determinate negation. In essence, spirit is an intrinsic aspect of our humanity, applicable to every individual, including atheists. The term spirit might evoke discomfort for some due to its association with Catholic teachings. Skepticism is understandable, given its significant role in Christian doctrine. However, a more palatable interpretation of the concept is to view it as follows. Whether we attribute our existence to a God or consider it a cosmic accident is not the crux of the matter. This is why the God debate is somewhat moot. Instead, if we examine the entirety of human history, we cannot deny the continuous progression of humanity. There exists something inherent in our makeup, in our DNA, our subconscious, that drives the manifestation of a better version of ourselves into reality. As philosopher R.C. Solomon suggests, what becomes evident from Hegel's writings is that spirit or Geist refers to a kind of shared or common general consciousness that is present in all individuals. Furthermore, this essence likely extends to all forms of conscious life in the cosmos. Religion has just done what it always does, and claims everything as the work of a god, just like it claimed a god sent a flood to cleanse the earth from sinners, while in all likelihood, it was some sort of cosmic bump. I say bump because it didn't cause our extinction. In fact, such bumps have spurred humanity on, such as the asteroid that caused the extinction of the dinosaurs. If that didn't happen, humanity most likely would have never had a chance. The way I prefer to conceptualize spirit or Geist is to consider it as the spirit of life, which can be represented by the acronym SOL, akin to the solar energy from the sun, which sustains life. Alternatively, it can be likened to the soul, representing the mind or consciousness that persists beyond the physical body. This brings us to the contentious topic of the afterlife, which may prompt some viewers, regardless of whether they are theists or atheists, to consider stopping this video. However, before any firm decisions are made, it's important to understand why this topic warrants investigation. Firstly, it's significant because the concept of an afterlife is a cornerstone of many, if not all, religions. Thus, exploring it from this perspective is necessary, regardless of its veracity. Secondly, contemporary literature on the subject from near-death experiences often diverges significantly from traditional religious teachings, suggesting that mainstream religions may be overlooking or neglecting this aspect. Lastly, the reluctance of atheists to engage with the idea of an afterlife may stem from its association with religious dogma, which they may reject outright for fear of validating ancient religious beliefs. But the main reason why some might consider this subject ridiculous to bring up is that there is just no proof that such a phenomenon can exist. It doesn't fit in with the kind of science we know today. Therefore, it is considered an impossibility. So allow me to share a valuable quote from Aristotle related to critical thinking, to encourage those who have listened so far but feel the urge to switch off this video. Quote, "It is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it." End quote. Keep this in mind as we delve into this topic, and remember that it is not a cardinal sin for a scientific mind to consider possibilities beyond the current understanding of science. The science of today may differ from the science yet to be discovered. Consider the case of Scottish-Irish physicist William Thomson, better known as Lord Kelvin, who was one of the most eminent scientists of the 19th century and is best known today for inventing the international system of absolute temperature that bears his name. In 1895, Lord Kelvin famously said, "Heavier than air flying machines are impossible." Yet, on December 17, 1903, the Wright brothers successfully achieved the first controlled, heavier-than-air human flight. As I mentioned in the previous video, if we were to find a form of sublation regarding the God debate, it would mean that both sides of the debate could have their cake and eat it too. The reason I say this is because on one hand, religion might be correct in its speculative hypothesis, such as an afterlife. On the other hand, it would be science that ultimately makes such discoveries possible. Furthermore, even for those who cannot bring themselves to entertain the idea of the afterlife, regardless of whether it is indeed an impossibility, the belief or faith in such a notion warrants an investigation. In his writings, Friedrich Nietzsche famously declared that God is dead, and it is we who killed him. The interpretation of this statement may vary depending on the analyst, and to some extent, all interpretations seem valid from what I gather. Some argue that Nietzsche meant the demise of the Catholic God, while the Lutheran God remained intact. Given Nietzsche's upbringing in a Lutheran household and his father's profession as a Lutheran minister, this interpretation is unsurprising. The Lutheran Reformation movement of the early 16th century was a pivotal event in German history. Both Nietzsche and Hegel, being German, were influenced by the Lutheran tradition and offered critiques of Christianity. While Hegel's critique centered on the Lutheran tenet that no mediator is necessary between God and the individual, Nietzsche's critique was more nuanced. On one hand, he suggested that eradicating religious cultural traditions would lead to nihilism and unprecedented casualties, a prediction that preceded World War I by only decades. This was during the period when the Industrial Revolution gained momentum, and the Enlightenment ideals of reason were taken to extremes, detached from true rationality. But at the same time, Nietzsche also posited that the Christian Judeo-tradition itself was inherently nihilistic. He argued that this tradition not only suppressed human will and desires to maintain control, but also repressed them by deeming them sinful, thereby permanently stifling these drives, thus making this form of faith nihilistic. Nietzsche saw no viable solution to escape the constraints of the repressive Christian Judeo-tradition, believing that a new tradition could not emerge in time to avert disaster. This conviction led him to write what he considered his magnum opus, Thus Spake Zarathustra, a fable that teaches the individual to ascend and become the Superman while remaining grounded in earthly reality. Through this work, Nietzsche offers a critique of the Christian Judeo-tradition, particularly regarding the concept of the afterlife. He vehemently opposed the notion that one must suppress all desires and conform to divine commands in this life to earn a place in heaven next to God, as dictated by the Church. Additionally, he criticized the idea of turning the other cheek when wronged, suggesting that in heaven one could derive satisfaction from witnessing the punishment of those who had wronged them burning in hell. From Thus Spake Zarathustra, prologue, quote, I conjure you, my brethren, remain true to the earth, and believe not those who speak unto you of super-earthly hopes. Poisoners are they, whether they know it or not. Despisers of life are they, decaying ones and poisoned ones themselves, of whom the earth is weary, so away with them. End quote. Nietzsche's disdain for how the afterlife was portrayed is justified. It was depicted as a promise of reward to the individual, contingent upon obedience to the Church and its priests. This obedience demanded repressing certain desires and enduring suffering for one's faith. The belief was that the greater the sacrifice, the greater the reward in heaven. While Nietzsche didn't discuss Hegel extensively, their philosophies complement each other. Both philosophers emphasize the significance of the individual's will. Nietzsche uses terms like will and drive, while Hegel underscores the necessity of absolute freedom to empower the individual, allowing them to energize spirit, that is, the spirit of life, here and now, in this earthly life. According to Hegel, the foundation of self-consciousness is grounded in desire, which entails an autonomous and self-driven pursuit to assert one's will and passions. Here, we can explore the stark contrast between a crude yet necessary narrative that has underpinned most religions so far and an alternative narrative more aligned with our current level of consciousness. This can be done even without having proof of the existence of an afterlife, but rather as a hypothesis, even after considering the numerous reports of such experiences made possible by the advancements in medical science. Instead, if you must, we can view discussions about the afterlife in a form of a theory, akin to how we approach speculative philosophy. Science speculates about concepts just as incredible as an afterlife, such as parallel universes. For instance, a headline and opening paragraph from space.com, we have, quote, do parallel universes exist? We might live in a multiverse. The idea of parallel universes is no longer confined to the realm of science fiction. There are now scientific theories supporting the existence of parallel universes beyond our own. However, the multiverse theory remains one of the most controversial theories in science. End quote. Moreover, there are acceptable speculations about whether the entire universe could be a simulation. And not to forget, one can inquire about the possibility of time travel without facing ridicule. If the scientific community finds it acceptable to propose such ideas, even though they remain highly controversial, then it shouldn't be considered ridiculous and unacceptable to entertain the idea of consciousness existing beyond this realm. In fact, all of these different theories accepted by the science community are compatible with the theory of the afterlife. So why is it considered taboo to entertain the theory of an afterlife when it is just as incredible as the other theories being discussed by science? The answer to that, as I have mentioned before, lies in the fact that, for the most part, there are two kinds of people in the world: the theist and the atheist, both of whom have reasons to ignore the theory of the afterlife. The theist, faithful to their religion and believing it to be the only true one, may find the literature from near-death experiences unsettling. Despite all reports indicating the presence of something akin to God, these experiences do not specify any earthly religion as the chosen or one true religion. Instead, there is a sense that all religions may be paths toward the same destination. Furthermore, God is portrayed as loving us unconditionally for who we are, without judgment, condemnation, anger, or wrath, and without requiring worship. These notions may not sit well with the theist, who believes their religion to be the only true one. They may be displeased at the idea of not having to worship to secure their position in heaven, and for some, the notion that God does not judge or condemn for those who have turned the other cheek. This does not align with their expectation that their enemies will be punished in hell. For atheists, it ultimately boils down to their vehement opposition to anything suggesting that religion holds validity on any level. Even when presented with evidence, they would discard the fundamental virtue of science, which is to follow the evidence regardless of any emotional attachments. The irony is that it is only through the advancement of medical science that we are able to make such discoveries. Here, we can observe another aspect of sublation, wherein on one hand a true synthesis emerges from the negation between the thesis and antithesis, where both sides can have their cake and eat it too, so to speak. However, on the other hand, whenever two opposing views are deemed correct, there is another element at play. Both sides are also flawed in some way or another. The critical and inescapable factor present in every event throughout history, which often hinders progress and is deeply embedded in both sides like a double-edged sword, is the ego. The ego is not only inescapable, but a necessary part of one's psychic makeup. It is what is in between and connects, like a bridge, so to speak, that the spirit of life, or the soul, traverses over to navigate its way through the body to manifest into existence. If every individual's will, driven by desire with passion, powered by spirit, traversing through the ego, is not only inescapable, but necessary. To then identify a problem and declare the remedy is to repress these inescapable essentials and think, as we often do, that the ego needs to be quashed. This is obviously not the solution. The problem does not lie with these fundamental faculties in and of themselves, but rather with how they are being implemented. As we observe, narratives based on religion have historically been intrinsic to all civilizations, manifesting into their culture. Therefore, it is evident that we must investigate these narratives. We have already examined their effects in the preceding discussion. Now, it is essential to reassess our position based on the insights we have gained. Utilizing both speculative and pragmatic philosophy, and engaging both the left and right hemispheres of the brain, in the next chapter, we will start by adopting the pragmatic approach. Once we have established our foundation through this process, we can then proceed to speculate further.